Yep, I am.
Right. Well,
So,
what's going
so
on?
I wouldn't say anything's growing, but I've maintained some sort of. I think last time we spoke, I sort of talked about some of the stuff that I was doing online at that time. It's been through a process of going through online, and then summer hit, so we had some outdoor activity access and did some of that sort of stuff, and the club opened up in that time too, so a bit of that. And then it closed down, so back to online or outside, and then back and forward between the two. So, yeah, bit of stuff. How about you guys? Are you guys in clinic?
Oh, yeah, we're still working, so no problem. Yep. I mean, maybe down a little bit. People want to, like, I just had a client today. Her father, who's in a nursing home, got exposed to COVID, and so she's exposed to him, and so she canceled. And I had a couple people who want to wait till early next year before they come back. So, but still some coming in. I mean, luckily we're still paying the bills and feeding our faces.
Good to hear. I mean, there's definitely, even in Ontario, where from a Canadian standpoint, the sort of the epicenter, if you will, here in Ontario and Toronto particularly, is high. There's success stories, places that are moving and grooving, but far and few between by any sort of major economic sides. And it's just a tough run, man. But yeah, so from on my side, I've been doing that sort of stuff, and the online stuff has been fruitful for those who are partaking.
Good.
It's I think when we spoke last, it's definitely a place of growth, both professional practitioner growth, and of course their growth, which is primary. They weren't aware that that's available there, and to be honest, nor was I aware that what could be achieved in a purely observational setting is able to be achieved. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing we talked about last time, was how your observational process was different and how much more you had to listen to what was being said to you. And
the hermeneutical approach, and getting their feedback, becoming an inherent listener, and I think trusting the observation too. Like, did I see that? Is that what I just saw? Maybe I'll just get them to repeat it. Okay.
Yeah.
There's inherent challenges with that one process right there. I mean, if we're talking about some sort of excitation, potentiation response, and I get them to repeat it, am I seeing what I'm seeing, or am I seeing a false positive here, right? But anyway, it's been good. I mean, listen, I've had some pretty happy responses with people, out of the ordinary too. Like, there was one lady working with, and you might remember this lady. I presented it when I came down to, I think it was the last time I came down, and I brought some clients' case folders with me, and one of them was a lady who'd really quite sick. That was how you described her. She had had a stroke, like a torn artery, like
I do remember that. Yeah, in her neck.
Yeah, like a torn artery or whatever it was. Like, there's a name for it. I can't quite recall. But on top of other broken parts, like a radial ulnar fracture on her left arm, and then big toe was dislocated at certain points. But the stroke was a real thing. She was, clearly unhealthy. Couldn't really move her neck and stuff like that. So, anyway, we've been working since that time, and been through different parts, and a lot of it was hands-on and in person. But this person is exclusively, based on family circumstances, exclusively gone online.
Sure.
And she was up at the first three or 4 months was in home online, and then next 4, maybe 4.5, 5 months at a second home up in a lake, like a cottage, and came back to the city and got on the 55, 56-year-old lady, whatever, sort of got on the scale, and she came back to the next session. I didn't know she was on the scale, but she came back. She goes, I don't know why, but I'm like 13 pounds lighter.
It's interesting.
I said, well, the best I
Happy
checked.
about that, or
Yeah, she was extremely unexpected, right? Because she was eating, I mean, she's eating within their confinements at home, which is a little bit abnormal. She's more out on the restaurant food normally, so that's sort of, probably a changing point. But I did draw an obvious, the highlight to the fact that she'd been as consistent as she had ever been, 2 times a week, every week. Resistance training, different configurations, I didn't say it like this, but it's, that part of it was tied into the full experiment. And it wasn't necessarily a focus for her, although it was a stated focus back in the beginning. I'd like to be lighter and better shape, but, like I was when I was younger.
okay,
So, yeah, so a nice surprise for her.
good.
But that sort of talked into this idea about sort of energy management, the body's energy management and metabolic processes being influenced in ways that she maybe hadn't done before. And it was sort of funneled because in the past she had been exploring things like Pilates, with some sort of regularity. It was before I came on the scene and while I was on the scene, but there was this sort of, I don't want to say competing, but you know what I mean? Like there was a back and forth between I'm going to Pilates today or I'm going to Lance today, right? So whatever that represented as well. So, but yeah, so things like that are, surprising. And at the practitioner level, one of the things that's been surprising with that has been the ability to sort of expand her movement repertoire, if you will, using configurations observationally. Because I can't key make it, right? Can't put a quality control in. Relatively speaking, I mean, I could use ankle weights and stuff to sort of put on a limb or whatever it is, but it's a little dangerous with her, right? Like I'm less likely to explore something where she's having to navigate her body up against an external load at some sort of extension, like a shoulder. I'm not sure that I want to do that with her.
What's been helping her the most? What kind of interventions have you been implementing?
Yeah, so so one of the things that's always been a challenge is anything around her neck. She's got this. She had this interpretation that told from one of her medical team that you absolutely shouldn't have anyone touch your neck ever, and don't hyperextend, which she thought was this.
Oh, really? Not this.
No, she wasn't. It wasn't explained to her what that meant, and so she went for years thinking that this is what she shouldn't do. So she would sort of, shuffle her body around to sort of deal with her neck, and wouldn't sort of lean over here. Everything was sort of supported that way, and so anyway, I mean, for years for a long time, I've been trying to figure out how I'm going to get into this. How am I going to do this? Get into her neck without touching it somehow. And so anyway, after having good success and her feeling good and seeing improvements in what I was deeming as observational motor control improvement and seeing her abilities improve, I started to rethink how I was going to try to approach it. And I tried to approach it through one of the shoulders, and it seems at this point it seems to be pretty good. So,
she's pleased.
Yeah, she's reporting sleeping like without any pain in her neck, which is the first time since that happened in 2010.
Wow.
So she's pleased. She's pleased, and it's pretty freaky to watch because I'm like watching this thing, and in the back of my mind, I'm cautious, right? I mean, as we have been trained and encouraged to be thinking. So looking and watching and saying, okay, where's the dose here? This is remember what I'm dealing with in the tissues. Remember what I'm dealing with the materials. Remember what the sensation reports are, right? Is that model?
Yeah, I wondered how who's using that decision model and how you guys are using that, right? Is it helpful?
I think absolutely, Greg. I think absolutely that among other ones that have been presented are absolutely critical. The allostasis, the dose response, 100%. Like it's almost I don't know what the word is, but I know I've heard it come out of your mouth before. It's almost when it's it's gone for me. You know, when you're sort of, you've just come to know something is sort of not a truth, but you know what I mean? You just come to sort of know that, yeah, man, this makes total sense. I don't even really think about questioning it. Not that I don't, but you know what I mean? Like, it's that sort of, is it freedom? Is that what I don't call it? But anyway, that idea that, yeah, if you were to act in lack of consideration of a material when you know there's a material break there, well, then you've halved your picture. You can't really make decisions in that realm. It's in a box. It's almost locked up.
That's right.
Only by default of the fact that you just haven't really considered it, and so you can't use that information to make a decision out of in concert with the ones that you are making. So yeah, no, I think it is really, really important. And thank you for obviously for all your time, energy, effort, guidance, and willingness to share all that. It's been profound.
Good. Well,
how about in your practice there, buddy? How's things going on your end with clients?
Yeah, real good. Definitely, using the stuff and getting people to move better, and it's just amazing to me how improving motor output and control can help sensation so much, especially with stubborn issues, right? Getting folks who've had the chiropractors and had the massage and had the acupuncture and taken the medications, and nothing really is working. And you start looking around and finding these quality output issues, and start to use all the different approaches you can to improve it, and then their pain levels go down or go away. It's just an amazing thing to watch, for sure. Yeah, I just had Christopher Celli up. You know Christopher Celli?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, he was just in town this past week, and he's not up to speed with all the things that we're doing. He was in the Florida course, that week course, where I started to introduce to you guys some of these ideas, but hadn't really been in touch with where we're at now. And it was amazing, to see, for him, just the revelation for himself, things he thought was wrong that really weren't, problems that he thought were problems that really weren't, and areas that he didn't even know were problems really were, and then, how quickly, if they are, in the neuromusculoskeletal, in the control system, how quickly simple things like the oculomotor and the cervical effects and pelvic floor and, CPG, right? How quickly those things, when you start working with them and improving them, how fast really. Now he's healthy and takes care of himself, but how quickly the body can respond, even with what apparently is not high doses. I mean, we weren't like crushing him or anything with high stimulations. We were just getting him to reacquire, some of these things that he didn't know were lost. And so, it was great. And he was blown away. He was like, wait a second. What the heck? What's happening to me? Right. So, I
remember Chris was one of my first partners in one of the mastery courses that we did previously. Okay. I think it was might have been upper extremity that you were taking that time many years ago, and he's a great guy. He was an advanced practitioner. I mean, he was right into it, man. Like passionate as hell, and really into the journey of it. And I remember that, just always having that impression of him that he would.
Yeah, he loves it. He loves helping people, and that's great.
Yeah.
So, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so yeah, that's pretty cool. And you mentioned some of the stuff there with like the cervical and the ocular motor and stuff like that. And I remember when we, and again for this, if I ever thank you today, just tell me to shut up, brother. That webinar that you did, directionality.
Oh boy, yeah, that's
Have you had some feedback come back from?
Oh yeah, I did that with him, so like we did a phase 2 assessment, comparing his, extremities and trunk and everything left to right. And he was stunned that most of the asymmetry and strength endurance output, at least for that early anaerobic glycolytic phase, it was primarily his right side, right elbow extensors, right flexors, right shoulder pressing, right knee extension, right anterior, right, and he's right hand dominant. He's just like, what is going on? And these were pretty significant asymmetries in number of reps per unit time for a given, the torque scenario. And so what was amazing was just doing the oculomotor, the cervical influence, and the directionality was his right, going to the right frontal plane and going to the right in the transverse plane. We went back and checked all of those strength endurance asymmetries, and they all corrected without doing sets and reps and progressing volume and all that stuff. It's just like, what the heck, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome, eh? And have you had many others report back to you about the use on directionality and stuff?
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. It's they're getting some remarkable.
What are the crew saying? Like, what are the practitioners saying about it?
Remarkable. Well, that their clients, just feel remarkably better, more centered. I've been working with Jen Shimon. I don't know if you know Jen, up in Michigan, and she's been coming down and had a lot of serious health issues and surgeries, and same thing. Once we clear up some of these I don't know, more global system neurological things, right? I think there really is a hierarchy now where the eye motor and the neck motor and the laterality, the directionality concepts are really important. If you start to get a sense for a trend there, based on the data you're collecting, get that stuff buttoned up, and everything else seems to be a whole lot easier. Or you'll localize a problem, like, okay, now here we are, we're at this area, your right knee, which you injured and has a meniscus tear, whatever. Now we can really focus on this and get it better. And
sort of in the backdrop of the, so that idea where we're sort of, more blue sky, more globally has been sort of tied up with some directionality, and now you get to see something. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, you really get to,
you couldn't see it before necessarily.
Yeah, and you're just like, okay, this is over here. Remember, I like to, look for the things that aren't changing, right? Like, hey, why does this part not change? No matter what we're doing, this part doesn't change in terms of improving motor output or range or sensation control. And then once I kind of clear out the eye and the neck and the tongue and the respiratory and the CPG, then it really shows up like, okay, here's what's going on over here. This is what we need to work on. And then it starts to respond better.
Yeah, that's cool. You had mentioned that hierarchical thing in the directionality discussion, that you'd come, there's a point in time where you sort of alluded to and stated that you believe that there's a hierarchy about the sensory organ system and the orientation of the head, and it's keeping it on straight and that sort of thing. What's outside of what we've just sort of discussed? Are there things outside of that have led to that hypothesis or that thinking?
Mostly just my experiences, and that if there are issues with the eye motor and neck motor and tongue motor and respiratory and or the direction system, it's really hard to progress whatever changes you're trying to make somewhere else. They just seem to be stubbornly resistant to changing and progressing them. And so what I'm seeing is, man, if there is anything in any of those big systems, right, that really demand a lot of the brain, like vision, just is your vision and eye control system is projected throughout your brain. I mean, almost all regions of your brain have to deal with vision. The orientation of your head and neck is immensely important to how you control your entire body. Respiration, again, that bridge between the autonomic and the voluntary somatic system, right? And then, your ability to really understand and navigate in three-dimensional space. These are just big order. You got to be able to control these things. And what tells you that? I mean, something like a stroke where you have a brain injury, you see the devastation and how systemic it is.
Yeah.
And when you lose that higher order control, you're in big trouble.
Yeah. Sometimes I think the more interesting, I mean, obviously, and 100% agree, but sometimes I think that more interesting part is the nuances in the more less presenting individuals. You know what I mean? Like the less obvious ones, the ones that are apparently more healthy, right? Or don't have the big motor lesions or upper neuron lesions or anything like that. They're actually okay. There's not really any big deviations too much in their health. They've got things, of course, as we all do, but how on those clients there's a sort of a similar path of what you're describing. Clearly in a more catastrophic sense, when something's really gone wrong, sure. But it sort of happens to a lesser extent, even in the lower control scenarios. Have you noticed that?
Well, that describes Chris's scenario, right? Where you'd see he's running and he's playing basketball, and he's lifting weights, and you would see him and think there's nothing wrong with this guy.
Right.
He's reporting sensations that he doesn't like, right? He's like, this doesn't feel right and that doesn't feel good. But outwardly watching him move around, you generally wouldn't get the sense that problems. But once we started taking the data and putting them in situations, it was like, wait a second, what is going on here, right? Yeah. When he goes to curl just a seated dumbbell curl, and he does 10 of them on the left arm, and he only can do 4 on the right. And you're like, what? He's like, what is going on? Then we go to the elbow extension and same thing. You're like, he can't get as many reps on the dominant side in the same time interval, same basic exercise. And then we saw for the leg and, and so then you see this pattern kind of show up like, wait a second.
Yeah. It's profound. It's profound. It's a profound experience for people, particularly fit people, but any people, to go through physical excursion like that and discover, if you will, maybe in the energy of the explorer, as we call the Explorers Club, right? Maybe in the energy of the explorer, discover some sort of truth about their movement capacity or ability, or their lack of, that was unknown to them. There's a powerful junction there, and if you've got a good understanding with the person, how that can be, of course, the practitioner included in it, but that takes people and really shifts them. They're like, man, how do I not know that if they're good movers? And if they're not good movers, they're like, oh yeah, I guess I maybe had a sense of that, or that really surprises me. I mean, you get any gamut of reaction right across, right? Like it's pretty crazy. Max, sorry, I've just got to realize my parking just in the car park back here just went out of lapse, so I'm just going to quickly log, just pay for it here.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, crazy stuff, eh? I'm sure that blew Chris away.
Yeah, it was kind of a shocking thing. And then again, how quickly we could actually improve it. That's another thing. Again, without saying, oh, your right elbow flexor muscles are weaker than your left. So we have to, thinking about it as some kind of local problem with the elbow flexors. They don't have enough cross section, or, they have some kind of other contributor to their inability to produce as much torque per unit time. And then we just look at, again, that global eyes, neck. He had a neck injury, a couple neck injuries, and CPG, and just stimulate those things with simple systematicity concepts, or simple myo-isoplyo sequences. And next thing you know, we go back and say, all right, but same dumbbell exercise. Now all of a sudden he's got all this output back, and so it really showed that it wasn't necessarily something wrong with the muscle material.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't a muscle material problem. Sometimes it is with torn muscles and injured muscles for sure, or a tendon, something. But in this case, it was about the control, about the central nervous system's ability to get information over there and convert it to firing frequency and motor unit recruitment, and improve energy substrate utilization. So, right.
The thing that just came to me then, as you said, that was that passing of information across the entire network.
Yeah. So intelligence, right, is distributed. We think that all of our intelligence is only in our head. It's distributed through the system.
That sort of resides with me, or rings with me, as we've been discussing these changes in Chris and obviously others, whereby the sort of the layering, there's that term in some rehab circles and other places where they peel the onion. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Pull the layer back. You see a similar layer. You work on that. You pull the layer back. In this application, it's actually almost like it's accelerative onion peeling down to the core. And then once you get to the core, you see a problem. That's a real problem at a level that isn't obvious. It's not necessarily a tissue level directly. It's not necessarily a sort of a one of the other aspects of muscle health. It's not local necessarily. It's something in behind that. It's like the frame, the structure behind it. And so you get down to the core, and then you start to build back on it, and you actually rebuild the onion.
Yes. Yeah, it's that hub link node network idea, right? We start cleaning this up, and we get the hubs and the links and the nodes, and the information's flowing through there more readily and more precisely, and there's more access now. Yeah, more access, exactly, across the network. You've got this information flowing. It's truly profound what happens, and one of the interesting things that I'm having lately is across my observations are going across the time. What's the continuum again? The time. You mean the force velocity curve?
No, that too. But as time, space, time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We did that sequence for him where he had cancer when he was a young man, and he beat it amazingly enough, but he had a terrible thing happen to him where they had a PICC line in, and the toxic, the chemistry, the chemo, which very toxic stuff, they were trying to move it through that PICC line. Well, that PICC line, that needle had come out of his vein, and so the toxic chemicals actually seep into his body's materials in this upper quadrant, in the shoulder, and it was just, he said it was like having molten lead poured on his shoulder. The pain was almost impossible to deal with, and that was 30 years ago or whatever, 25 years ago. Well, we did that simple, iso hold to fatigue, right? Where I would, fatigue him. And I think in his right shoulder, we did 8-pound dumbbell seated with, held out to about 90 degrees. And he voluntarily terminated at 2 minutes. And then I immediately checked the QMAMC to see if he still had pretty good contract. He did. It was nice and solid. And then we did it on the left. I had him report, where does he feel the fatigue and the metabolic stress? It was, in the shoulder girdle, in the deltoid group, in the trapezius. And then he does it on the left side. He held it, same basic kinematic scenario, but he's not feeling his shoulder. He's feeling some kind of pain in his elbow area, and in his bicep. And he held it for 2 minutes. But when I did the QMAMC right after, he was not recovered, right? He couldn't generate force, and it took probably 30 seconds or more for him to get some contraction back. And he didn't feel anything in his shoulder girdle, where you would think all the tissues are experiencing the ischemia, right? The hypoxia, the lactate buildup, pH changes, right? This is why we feel, the muscle where we're contracting. And that surprised him as well, like, what's going on, So we set up a simple prescription for him to do, and see if he could rebuild that endurance with the recovery part.
Right.
So we trained the recovery. Yeah, we were training the recovery part.
Yeah. That's the part that's been happening too, where people have they've experienced work elsewhere than you might expect it. Like you're expecting, like in Chris's sense, I'm expecting something in the calf working with someone's lower leg, and I'm like, where do you feel that? And like hamstring, like just hamstring, lower back. Really? You feeling this? Hamstring, lower back. Yep. Okay, cool. That's great.
So weird.
Then I start seeing this on the length tension curve and start playing around with it, and interesting enough, it almost becomes a little directive in the sense that when they get the biggest sense in the, potentially the accessory areas, if you want to call them accessory areas, whatever you want to call them, it's like it's almost, I'm not quite there, but when I get to the place, like at the toes, for instance, I get down to the toes, I'm like, where do you feel that? I don't feel that at all. That feels absolutely like I've got nothing to them. Unless they go to a different length, and then suddenly they've got it. So that length tension thing becomes an identifier. But that sensation report, it's indicative. It becomes rather informing to both the individual, but more importantly to me. I'm like, oh, hang on, what's going on here? These guys aren't sensing. They don't have the sense here. There's something bigger. So.
Have you been reading the series I'm doing on Exercise Explorers Club on the sensorium and motor control and pain yet?
No, I wasn't aware of that. What is it? What's it called?
Oh, all right, get on that. So I've been doing I think a 10-part series. I've got the first 6 parts done.
There's good reading.
Yeah, it's called, let me pull up the document name so I've got it accurately. It's called the Human Sensorium.
Mm-hmm. What's the sort of general gist here? There's several parts. I'm kind of building each part, and it's about this relationship between the human sensorium, the motor control, and pain, right? And how is it that our sensory system and our motor control system and pain, how do they relate to each other? And I start talking about human agency, right? This sense of our ability to control ourselves in space and in time, and how degradations in the sensory system and or the motor control system could be the reason you have pain, but it also affects, again, agency, that you can't navigate your environment as well as you would want to. Can you define agency for me, Chris?
Yeah, it's this idea of being able to act in your environment based on the way you want to act. When you want to stand up, you can stand up. When you want to sit down, you can sit down. When you want to start walking, you can start walking.
Get it.
Control of the self in an environment, and so sensation is critically important to that. If you cannot feel your body and know where it is and what's happening to it as you interact with the space and conditions, you have a loss of agency, you have a loss of capability, and it's a
crazy. Awesome. I'm going to read it for sure. I'll be on it. What I was saying earlier about the space-time thing, and what I was meaning by that is just the relationship between observations of a young person, 14, middle-aged person, 50, and a more aging person, 75. And so this, what does that say? Sensation, perception, and thank you. I was going to ask you about this.
Right.
What's that called? Sensation, perception, perception, and the aging process.
So, yeah, a 70-year-old has a completely different sensory experience than a 25-year-old.
Crazy. So this is what I was sort of meaning when I was commenting on that earlier, is that, you know, these examples, when you take people through it, like, you know, you've got tools to work with any one of those people, but you've got a different animal in effect in front of you, working with you, and the combination of the interrelationships of people, the combination across all those different factors, how they feel or have come to feel pain, how they have come to move in the environment, agency, how they perceive any of that information, you know, wired into their experience, and it's around physicality.
Correct.
And so the aging person is an interesting animal in a way. They're on one sense more complex, in many senses more complex, more what's the word here? There's more considerations, if you will. Not that that necessarily should be the case, but you might have more natural considerations in a way. But their expression of how they use their body and experience these things of limitation can be expressed almost exactly the same, sometimes in more detail than the younger person. So my example, the younger person young people that I've been working with, it's like, can you sense that? Are you aware of that? And no, it feels the same to me. And so they clearly know, because it's two different numbers, right? They just did it themselves. They said, oh, and it's almost like it takes time for them even to develop the sense or acknowledgement, one of the two, that that's actually a thing. And there can be lots tied up in that. But more interestingly was the other side of that equation, where the 75-year-old's lifting this thing and going, man, I don't feel anything. I could do this forever. All right? And I go and push on that thing, and there ain't nothing behind it.
Nothing. So bizarre.
But again, the change between where there was something behind it before, and then now there's not. And they're like astonished. They're like, hang on, I couldn't feel it. Because their perception is what? That they're going to feel work. They're not feeling work, and on the other side, they feel the work, so they don't think it's a problem. Isn't that a moment?
Strange, right? Very strange thing, right? Yeah, that they should be feeling the metabolic activity of the tissues that are active, right? Yeah, numbness is just the absence of sensation, right? And the absence of sensation can be just as much of a problem sometimes as too much sensation, right?
Yes.
Which people
100%.
call pain.
Dude,
Yeah, I'll have somebody go to voluntary fatigue, and I'm like, go ahead and just go until you can't go anymore. And they would stop, and I'd say, where do you feel that? And they go, I don't know. I don't really feel it. I said, so why did you stop? I got tired. Where'd you get tired? I don't really know. I don't really know where I got tired. Right? It's like, wow, man, that is just a weird scenario, right?
Crazy, man. Crazy.
So this becomes an important thing to explore, for sure. And again, apparently, what it seems to me that often, and I don't know exactly how often, but in my availability bias, when people get the sensations that are appropriate, you would think of for the scenarios, you know, they're on the knee extension, and they might start off with saying, I only feel my my hip when I'm doing left knee extension. I feel my hip up here and I feel my shin bone. That's what they say. And then you're like, boy, that is so weird, you know. And then after, and they have maybe some kind of knee pain, right? Even though it's not showing up on the leg extension, it shows up when they squat or when they walk. But on the knee extension, they just do it till they fatigue. And I'm like, where did you feel it? And they're like, and kind of in my shin and my hip. I'm like, okay. And they'll walk around like, oh, I still feel my knee pain. But then as we do the leg extension, the knee extension, and they start to actually feel their quadriceps area, like, oh, I'm starting to feel it in this thigh area now. Oh, can you feel your tibia anymore? No, I don't feel my tibia anymore. What about your hip? No, I don't really feel that anymore. Walk around. Do you have any knee pain now? No, I don't. My knee pain's gone. Right? It's like, well, what the heck is going on here, right? And so it's quite an exploration for them as much as, you know, for me. I mean, they have to experience themselves and tell me what's they're experiencing.
Yeah, agreed. I had an interesting, given all this COVID stuff and even before just club dynamics, I had my first consultation that I've had in, I don't know how long, probably a year.
Oh boy, yeah.
Just recently. And this person has a stated problem. And, you know, so naturally, as you'd expect, them sort of out of practice and, you know, not sharp on things. And anyway, it was a good experience. I felt like we got we'd had a respectful exchange, and there was lots of decent things that came out of it. But this one person stated that they have a real dislike and the dislike, if you will, dislike and a disgruntledness towards the medical model. They don't believe our allopathic medicine works at all. She's a holistic nutritionist. She's, you know, had lots of AK done to her and stuff like that. So anyway, so I started asking her to rate pain. She was like, refuses. I don't rate pain. Yeah, so of course one of the questions I asked, I said, well, how would you work with a system that, you know, is designed to get feedback in order to progress you? But, you know, it's not, obviously it's not going to be a go if she's not willing to enter into that discussion for whatever reason. Now there's probably bombs under that, right? There's lots of things to detonate under that, but case in point, right? Like that participation is critical. It is so, even if they don't know what they're really talking about, they just got to speak their, you know, for lack of a better term, their truth. Like the young kids I work with, they often don't have the way to describe it, but it's very layman's. They describe in layman's terms. You know, I'm like, cool. So I just work to understand that. That's some sort of description.
That's
Where'd
right.
you feel me? Over here. I'm like, okay, cool.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, that's it. That's the part. So sensation, materials, and control.
Yeah. Have you noticed like the path towards old stubborn injuries? So like if you have a, you know, let's say they 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they had a broken something, and then, you know, another part of the body 60 years ago or 50 years ago, they had this broken thing. You mentioned earlier, and I sort of got this picture in my head about, you know, buttoning up some of the more system-wide, you know, both sides of the nervous system, control centers, buttoning up that stuff to get down into the, and now you see some stuff which, you know, maybe you've tried working on it before and it was only responsive to a certain point, couldn't go much further, and then you go back to it, and then suddenly you start to see, after button up all that stuff, the big centers, you get more control response out of that thing, and it shows itself more readily. Like it's like, oh yeah, here's a problem. And interesting, their experience starts to talk to it. Like they're like, yeah, I'm feeling good. And then they're like, yeah, I'm noticing this little thing. It's not pain. It's just sort of weird. I'm sort of noticing these weird, and you start to get the feedback, which again starts to get you to think about, I wonder what's going on down here. Have you been seeing stuff like that? Yes. And then the next part of that question is, then when going back into those areas, those old injuries, and starting to work with them, are you noticing plastic changes that you're like, yes, wow?
Yep. I'll start doing the motor control QMAMCs, and again do the phase 1, phase 2 stuff. Maybe I'll do it again, even though I did it the first time. So let's repeat these things and and tell me what your experience is now with doing these things, and then they'll start. Yeah, it's almost like we're giving them the ability to be better at more accurate and precise about where the information is coming from or where the information is missing.
Right.
Like, it was so disorganized before that they couldn't even really tell where it was coming from and what was missing. But now that it's more precise and the hub link nodes are communicating and there's more clarity, they're like, oh, now I know what's missing. It's much clearer now, right? It's much clearer now what that information is. Okay, that's good to know. That's what I needed to know.
Yeah.
Because you think about something like what happened to Chris's shoulder, where he had not only a noxious stimulus that set off a bunch of mechanical afferent receptors and chemical receptors that went into his spinal cord and his brain, and his brain just was like, what the heck happened there? But he had material damage in there. And so does that like smudge that part of his brain that what's called de-differentiates the brain, right? The clarity now is lost. The brain doesn't have an accurate picture anymore of what these structures are and where they are, and even though he doesn't really feel anything there, right? So he doesn't think there's a problem.
Yes.
Then we start.
Yeah, and so what it sort of alludes to is that it's almost like unfolding that problem requires the big, we described it earlier as the global stimulus, like the multiple control centers being stimulated to a point, almost raising their threshold, if that's the right way to describe it, so that the system maybe has more recognition somehow of higher levels of control about it at that, if you want to call it the core, I don't want to call it the core, but you know what I mean, like at that sympathetic and parasympathetic level, that autonomic and that.
It's probably in line with the ideas of specificity and sensitivity in detection, right? In that it gets better at detecting, it gets better at error, right? It's like, oh, now I know what that error is.
Yeah.
Before I didn't even know if there was an error there. Now I know where there's error.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, agreed. And then once error detection is elevated,
you're more sensitive.
More
sensitive, and it's more specific. That's right.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah, I've noticed the same, man. Like I've got this one of the 75-year-olds was telling about broken wrist at 11, broken forearm radial ulnar at 11, had to have it rebroken, not after any healing. The person just cranked on it because it wasn't setting to their liking, the doctor, and all sorts of onset of trauma since then. Now, very little supination. Hardly any. Now I've gone at that before independently, but after doing that layering thing, using things like directionality or piecing configurations and systematicity together that are sort of part of the immediate system or the adjunct system. So moving towards this sort of thoracic, sort of scapular thoracic region down in through the trunk or the neck to that area, right? Then converging back out towards the arm's something different. It's almost more plastic. You're seeing as she uses it more, she gets more range of motion. She starts to have more sense, the acuity towards that, oh yeah, there's a problem there, is more accepted, because previously when working on it as a local thing, it was like nails on a chalkboard. You couldn't stand it. Now, it wasn't physical pain, it was more, it meant something different, deeper in his system. The system was just like, that's horrible.
Memory, deep memory of that.
Yeah,
there you go, right? So that makes sense to me, right? I mean, the way the brain has to perceive the arm is perceives the arm through the chest, through the scapula, through the clavicle, through the humerus. Oh, okay. My arm is part of all of this. Yes. This part of my arm is part of all of this. Yes. So if we can get all of this clearer and sharper and more precise, well, now this has something more precise and clear to connect with.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I was working with a guy, been working with him, multiple hand injuries, crush injuries, broken hands, moved tendons, right, and all kinds of problems. And we started to discover he just had this inability to like sense his whole right upper and trunk and spine. He couldn't feel his pec contract. He couldn't feel his bicep when he did exercises. All he felt was pain in his arm. He couldn't differentiate or sense specific parts, and his grip strength was really weak and compared to his left. And we started to work on his hand, and then we had to leave that and get back up to here, because anytime I had him squeezing something in his hand and I QMA and see this, it was weak. It was low quality. So I'm like, holy mackerel. So we had to kind of go back and forth, hand and trunk and spine and shoulder and elbow and back to hand, and keep reconnecting all of those dots.
Yeah. No, I can hear that, man. I can hear that. Hey, couple of questions. One was that, do you have any other books, Sensation, Perception, and Aging Process, about the hierarchical idea, being the sort of sensory, neck, cervical, anything that jumps out in that region that you could?
In my library at work, I'm sure that I do. I think I have another book on sensation and perception that talks.
Would you say that's got a lot to do with the sensation, or was it more about the sort of the motor control side, looking at this hierarchical thing?
Well, it's hard to again, it's hard to separate sensation and motor control, right? And so that's what's strange about these relationships.
Right.
But
okay.
Yeah, they talk about vision and the really dominant influence it has over the entire brain.
Right.
How hearing has a large influence on the brain and the body.
Right. That's a sort of a direction, vision, and hearing.
Yeah. Well, I started a client who they're not sure exactly why. He can point to a specific, very stressful point and transaction in his life where all of a sudden his head just got stuck like this. This is how he walks around.
Wow.
Right. Kind of a torticollis. Right. Well, this was years ago. And so in his posture exam, how do you think his body had reoriented itself? Because if he's walking around like this, guess where he wants his eyes?
Yeah, his eyes over here. So exactly.
He wants his eyes level and anterior. So he made all kinds of adjustments posturally, systemically, twisting his trunk and side bending his shoulders and everything to try to get his head so it was more facing forward, right?
Yeah. See that.
And so there's a classic an extreme example of how what's happening, the information the system needs through the vision drives everybody else.
Yeah.
Because of, again, what my hypothesis is that we're calibrated to the vertical line of gravity.
Yes, you mentioned that in the directionality.
Yeah.
The gravity vector is the orientation thing, which is like that water example. When you see you get tossed over in a wave, it gets distorted.
You don't know where you're at, and you don't know what up is and what down is, and it's very disorienting. Yeah. And you got a lot of trouble real fast, right? Now, astronauts have the same problem, right? They get disoriented very quickly.
Right.
And so we are calibrated, our very cells are calibrated to the line of gravity.
Yeah, that directional hypothesis and method of exploring it, man, it is revealing.
It's crazy, right? Yeah,
revealing.
it's
crazy.
Pretty
And,
wonderful.
and it's freeing as a practitioner. It's freeing too, because in the sense that, you know, I think at some point I recall that seminar. I must have listened to it 30 times.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
driving from, you know, up north to down Toronto, driving from Toronto to up north. I almost have it memorized.
Good.
Not really, but you know what I mean. It's just I'm so familiar with it. But I remember there's this point where we talked about that. If there's this encoding that's in there, and you don't want to spend too much time on one local area when it's this bigger piece that sort of involves orientation of something a certain way in order for you to see it. And that was a powerful moment. And experiences since then have just been crazy. It's like, oh, hang on, so this was a horizontal abduction thing. It seemed to also be low quality when you turn to that same side. Okay, cool. All right, we got that working pretty well. But where else should we go? Sure enough, in the globals, the right side arm shows up low quality. You put them back in that position, you get them to horizontally adduct the right side, and lo and behold, they can't hold it.
Strange.
Profound.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Profound.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Excellent. We'll keep going. Keep me posted on what's happening. And yeah, get in there on Exercise Explorers Club, get up to speed on the sensorium.
Yeah, no, I will. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and thanks for checking in today and having the time to chat. I really do appreciate it, and glad to hear things are rocking the way they are.
All right, Lance.
All right, man. Take care.
Yep, bye.